Okay, I want to talk a little bit about water conservation. Um, there are several methods to conserve our use of water so that we don't tap this resource faster than it can be regenerated. These include reducing agricultural water waste, reducing water waste in industry, and reducing municipal water waste. Here we see some examples. On the left, this is a micro irrigation system. This is basically an irrigation system where we have um, a pipe that runs through the soil underneath and releases water directly between young plants and eliminates much of the waste that's associated with traditional methods of irrigation. You know, spraying the water from above so that it sinks down. On the right, industrial water conservation is demonstrated by this deputy group of um, Coca-Cola company industry executives. These are joined by representatives of the Ministry of Water Resources and the Ministry of Commerce at the launch of a program aimed at improving water safety in rural China. Okay, so some of the resources from private industry can go towards providing a greater supply of potable water. And here we see an example of conserving water at home. In your bath, kitchen, and laundry, you can take steps to limit water use. Also, you can reuse water. Individual homes and buildings can be modified to collect and store gray water. This is water already used in sinks, showers, washing machines, and dishwaters. Gray water is used when clean water isn't required, for example, in flushing toilets, washing the car, and sprinkling the lawn, or especially in the Southwest, irrigating golf courses. Permits to install gray water systems vary from state to state. Arizona and other states with water shortages care more flexible than other states about allowing gray water systems. Other examples of water conservation include the use of a rain barrel. This is used to catch rain water. You can use this also to water your garden or to wash your car. You simply have to have a hose to catch the outflow, and it's a very effective method of augmenting your fresh water supply. Okay, so we get to our next set of concept checks. What is sustainable water use? Well, this is the wise use of water resources without harming the essential functioning of the hydrologic cycle or the ecosystems on which present and future humans depend. Next question, what are the benefits of dams on the Columbia River and what are some of the drawbacks? Well, the benefits include the generation of hydroelectric power, flood control, and a year-round supply of water for both urban and agricultural areas. However, fish populations have been adversely impacted by dams. They impede salmon migration and have significantly contributed to the decline of salmon populations. Next question. How can individuals conserve and manage water resources? Well, municipal water waste can be reduced by collecting and storing gray water for later use in toilets, on lawns, and to wash vehicles. Water-saving fixtures can also be installed into homes, and leaky water supplies can be taken care of. Also, limiting the use of water on a daily basis is highly effective. For example, one could modify personal habits when bathing, shaving, and brushing their teeth. Let's take a look at water pollution. We're going to define what it is, and we'll discuss how sewage is related to eutrophication, biochemical oxygen demand, and dissolved oxygen. And we'll distinguish between the two types of pollution sources and give examples of each, and describe sources of groundwater pollution. Water pollution is a physical or chemical change in water that adversely affects the health of humans and other organisms. Examples of sources of pollution include sewage, disease-causing agents, sediment pollution, inorganic plant and algal nutrients, organic compounds, inorganic chemicals, radioactive substances, and thermal pollution. And here we see a diagram of the different types of water pollution, their source, examples, and their effects. So take a peek at this. This is table 10.1 in your textbook. The next two slides detail these. So let's talk about sewage. This is wastewater from drains or sewers, and it includes human waste, soaps, and detergents. These contain disease-causing agents which are a threat to public health. They also produce an enrichment that causes often algal blooms, and this has an effect on the biochemical oxygen demand because the plants will utilize the oxygen as they respire and create zones in the water that are oxygen poor, and as a result can only support anaerobic organisms. Here's a look at the effect of sewage on dissolved gas and biological oxygen demand. Note the initial oxygen depletion, which is indicated by the green line, close to the sewage spill. The stream gradually recovers as the sewage is diluted or degraded. As indicated by the dashed line, the fish can't live in water that has less than 4 milligrams of dissolved oxygen per liter of water. And so here you see basically a fish-free zone. Now, question, does that mean that there's no life in that area? It doesn't. There are anaerobic bacteria that utilize this zone of the water as their version of an ecosystem. Basically what's happened again is that the ecosystem in this region has changed. Now, is that change good or bad? That's up to the value judgment of those who are examining the situation. What is eutrophication? Well, lakes, estuaries, and slow-flowing streams often exhibit this phenomenon. Basically what it is an overgrowth of plant material in the productive zone of the water that leaches oxygen out of the water and creates an anaerobic zone underneath it. Oligotrophic bodies of water are unenriched, clean water which supports small populations of aquatic organisms. Eutrophic bodies of water are cloudy because of the large number of algae and cyanobacteria. The water is enriched with inorganic plant and algal nutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus. This can be a natural long-term process, or it can be the result of artificial eutrophication, where we have an overnourishment of an aquatic ecosystem by nutrients due to human activity, such as agriculture and discharge from sewage treatment plants. And so you here see an example of both of these kinds of aquatic ecosystems. On the left, this is Crater Lake in Oregon. This is an oligotrophic lake. It's relatively nutrient poor and as a result supports a minimal amount of aquatic life. And on the right, you see an eutrophic lake in western New York, primarily as a result of the introduction of effluents due to human activity, and you could see the algal bloom created on the surface of the lake. So this would be the productive zone of this particular lake. What happens underneath this algal mass is that we create now an anaerobic environment that will not support a wide variety of aerobic species. Over here we see an illustration of how this operates. On the left, an oligotrophic lake has two levels of inorganic plant and algal nutrients. Its fish species require cool, oxygen-rich water. And on the right, a eutrophic lake has a high level of these nutrients, and its fish species tolerate warm, low-oxygen water. So again, you see an example of how a shift in abiotic conditions produces a selection for organisms that can tolerate those particular conditions. Here you see examples of species of fish that require high amounts of oxygen. These include bass and trout and pike and sturgeon and whitefish. Over here, fish that are able to survive in low oxygen conditions include carp, bullhead, and catfish. You can see these if you have ever looked at the aquatic life in the Mill Creek. And so again, here we see life filling a vacuum. Okay, sturdy species living in a different set of condition. So what are some sources of water pollution? Well, there's point sources. These are pollutants that can be traced to specific sources such as pipes, sewers, ditches that emanate from specific sites. And then there's non-point sources where the pollutants enter a body of water over a large area rather than a specific single point of entry. Examples include precipitation that washes pollutants out of the soil and into the water, and this results in polluted runoff. And here we see an example of a point source. This landfill leachate flows out of a pipe in Washington State. So let's take a look at how urban runoff can affect the quality of water. Many pollutants can be carried from storm drains on streets into streams and rivers. The largest single pollutant in urban runoff is organic waste, which removes dissolved oxygen from water as it decays. Fertilizers cause excessive algal growth, further depleting oxygen levels. Other everyday pollutants include used motor oil, which is often illegally poured into storm drains, as well as heavy metals. And this has a major impact on the aquatic ecosystem. It's going to shape the type of organisms that can manage to make a living now in this altered environment. Okay, let's take a look at groundwater pollution. Half of the United States obtains its drinking water from groundwater. The quality of this is a concern, and cleanup is not always technically feasible. One of the major concerns include contamination from pesticides, fertilizers, and organic compounds that seep into groundwater from landfills, storage tanks, backyards, golf courses, and all manner of urban structures. Cleanup can often be very, very costly. Here we see an example of how contamination enters groundwater. Agricultural practices and sewage runoff, both treated and untreated, as well as landfill leachate, industrial activity, and septic systems are some of the sources of groundwater pollution. Natural processes can only remove groundwater contamination very, very slowly. And so, in order to generate potable water, what we have to utilize is water purification plants. And these plants are designed to render the water potable regardless of its initial state. And they are basically an example of masterful engineering practice. If you ever get a chance to visit a water purification plant, take advantage of it, because I think you'll learn a lot about how the system operates, and you'll have a lot more faith in your drinking water. So we get to our next set of concept checks. What is water pollution? Water pollution is a physical or chemical change in water that adversely affects the health of humans and other organisms. Next question. How does point source pollution differ from non-point, and what are some examples of each? Point source pollution can be traced to a specific spot, whereas non-point source pollution enters bodies of water over large areas rather than being concentrated at a single point of entry. Point source pollution would occur if pollutants were discharged into the environment through pipes, sewers, or ditches from specific sites such as factories or sewage treatment plants. Non-point source pollution includes agricultural runoff, mining waste, municipal waste, construction sediment, and soil erosion. Next question. What is biochemical oxygen demand, and how is it related to sewage? BOD is the amount of oxygen that microorganisms need to decompose biological waste into CO2, water, and minerals. Sewage and other organic wastes are measured in terms of BOD. A large amount of sewage generates a high BOD, which robs the water of dissolved oxygen. Next, what are some common sources of groundwater pollutants? Well, these include pesticides, fertilizers, and organic compounds, which seep into groundwater from municipal sanitary landfills, underground storage tanks, backyards, golf courses, and intensively cultivated agricultural land. Okay, next thing we want to do is address improving water quality. We're going to describe how most drinking water is purified in the U.S. and distinguish among primary, secondary, and tertiary treatments for wastewater, and compare the goals of the Safe Drinking Water Act and the Clean Water Act. So, how do we clean water? Well, the objective is to remove contaminants from the water supply before and after use. The purification of drinking water is how municipal water supplies are treated before the water is used. First off, the turbid water is treated with chemical coagulants to clump and settle out the particles. Next, we filter it through sand to remove microorganisms. And then we apply disinfectants such as chlorine, ozone, and UV radiation to kill any remaining disease-causing organisms. And here's an example of how we treat municipal water for use. The water supply from a town can be stored in a reservoir or obtained from groundwater. It's then treated before use so that it's safe to drink, and this goes through the steps that we just previously described. After use, municipal sewer lines collect the wastewater, and the wastewater is then treated. In Cincinnati, for instance, the Metropolitan Sewer District performs this, and essentially it involves a series of settling tanks which allow particulates to fall to the bottom of the large tank. These particulates, as sediment, is drained off and it's burned, and then the wastewater is moved to a second tank where it's mixed with air so that oxygen and microbial action can break down organic contaminants, and then it's moved to a third settling tank whose effluents are then drained off and burned, and then finally the treated sewage is reintroduced back into the original body of water. And this takes a lot of the load off of water purification if the sewage is properly treated. Sewage that's not treated is what's called raw sewage, and that's much more damaging to the ecosystem than sewage that has been treated. We have primary treatment, where mechanical processes such as screening and gravitational settling remove suspended and floating particles, and this produces a primary sludge, which, as we stated, is burned. Secondary treatment, where biological treatment of wastewater is designed to decompose suspended organic material, and this reduces the water's biological oxygen demand. And this produces a secondary sludge, which is a mixture of bacteria-laden solids, which is again burned. And then we have tertiary treatment, where we use biological, chemical, and physical processes to reduce nitrogen and phosphorus in the water, and this purifies it for reuse. Here we see an example of primary and secondary sewage treatment. This basically describes what we just talked about. Again, the collection of the initial raw sewage, the screening and filtering of the sewage, the settling, the mixing with oxygen, and then the secondary settling tank. Again, all of this sludge is combusted, it's burned off, and then the treated sewage ends up going back into the original body of water from which it was extracted. How do we dispose of the sludge? Well, artificial wetlands can be used to treat reclaimed water. An example is the Orlando Wetland Park, where we have 16 million gallons per day of water on about 12,000 acres. These wetlands absorb and assimilate the contaminants, and this improves the wildlife habitat. So what this does is this provides a natural way to treat the sludge. Here in Cincinnati, we actually burn the sludge. It contains hydrocarbons and as a result is highly combustible. Here we see wastewater treatment in constructed wetlands in Orlando. The influent is pumped into the Orlando Wetlands Park, where more than 2 million aquatic plants and 200,000 trees remove excess nutrients from the reclaimed water influent. This reduces eutrophication and renders the water safer for the ecosystem. Other ways to control water pollution include legislation, which is effective on point sources. 2 very successful laws have been passed, but much work is still needed. The first includes the Safe Water Drinking Act, passed in '74. These were uniform federal standards for drinking water that guaranteed a safe water supply. The EPA had to determine the maximum contaminant levels that were allowed. A '96 amendment requires municipalities to inform which contaminants are present and in what amount. The Clean Water Act, passed in '77, improved the quality of rivers, lakes, aquifers, estuaries, and coastal waters, and it eliminates discharge of pollutants in U.S. waterways. It helped attain water quality levels that are safe for fishing and swimming. The EPA requires a monitoring of emissions in order to limit the damage to the ecosystem. How can we prevent water pollution at home? Well, individuals produce very little, but the collective effect with a large population is quite extensive. And so here you can see Table 10.2 showing you some precautions that you can take in the home, okay, the location indicated here, and what you can do to conserve water indicated in the right-hand column. This is Table 10.2 in your book, so take a peek at that. Water pollution in developing countries is a bigger problem. 1.4 billion people in the world do not have access to safe drinking water. 2.9 billion don't have access to sanitation. 250 million cases of water-related illnesses per year result, with 5 million or more resulting in death. Municipal water pollution is a greater problem in developing countries. Sewage from densely populated cities is dumped directly into rivers and coastal harbors. The Ganges is an example. This is India's holy river. It's used for bathing and washing clothes. It's very polluted by untreated sewage and industrial waste and the ashes of 35,000 humans per year. In China, we have severe water safety issues in densely populated areas. Here we can see a picture taken on the Ganges. Bathing and washing clothes in the Ganges are common practices in India. This river, contaminated by raw sewage discharged directly into the river at many locations, is unsafe for drinking or bathing. And here we see contaminated water in China. A woman in East China collects bottles from a river polluted with red dye and wastewater from a nearby paper factory. Widespread water pollution limits supplies of safe drinking water in many of China's cities. We get to our last block of concept checks. How is most drinking water purified in the United States? Well, it's treated with a chemical coagulant to remove suspended particles, and then sand filtered to remove remaining suspended material and microbes. Finally, it's disinfected, usually with chlorine, ozone, or UV radiation, to kill any remaining disease-causing agents. What are the stages in municipal sewage treatment, and what happens in each stage? Well, there's 3 stages in sewage treatment. Primary treatment involves removing suspended and floating particles by filtration. The secondary treatment stage uses biological treatment of wastewater to decompose suspended organic material. And the tertiary treatment stage uses advanced wastewater treatment methods to eliminate or reduce dissolved minerals, heavy metals, viruses, and organic compounds. Next question. How was the Safe Drinking Water Act, what was its effect on U.S. water supplies, and how was the Clean Water Act effective on U.S. water supplies? Well, the Safe Drinking Water Act set uniform federal standards to ensure safe public water supply. The EPA oversees the states to ensure that they adhere to the maximum contaminant levels for specific water pollutants. And municipal water suppliers have to disclose what contaminants are present in their city's water supply. The Clean Water Act, on the other hand, affects the quality of rivers, lakes, aquifers, estuaries, and coastal water. It's aimed at eliminating the discharge of pollutants in U.S. waterways and to attain water quality levels that make these waterways safe for fishing and swimming. It has effectively improved the quality of water from point sources. And here is another case study. This is from China. This is the Three Gorges Dam. It's the world's largest dam on the world's largest and longest river. It's initiated to control the devastating flooding of the Yangtze. It has 26 hydroelectric generators, and it uses, which is equivalent to the energy generated by 50 million tons of coal. It has raised water levels, and as a result, 1 million people have had to relocate. It has fragmented habitats, fish species have declined, and spawning conditions have altered, and migratory routes for these fish have been blocked. Rare species have been endangered. Examples include the river dolphin and the finless porpoise. And here you can see the location of the Three Gorges Dam and the extent here of the Yangtze, okay, running throughout mainland China. And here's an example of some of the affected species. This is an example of a finless porpoise. Okay, that brings us to the end of this chapter. Make sure and review this material, as it will be covered on the upcoming exam, and I'll see everybody in class. Thank you.